Hi everybody and welcome back to our beginner's guide to photography, where we cover all the basics to help you get to grips with your camera. In this episode we're going to cover how a camera works and some of the terminologies we'll be using in future episodes. We'll then move on to cover lenses and specifically focal lengths and minimum focus distances. And finally we'll have a closer look at memory cards and the various formats you can record in. So, after completing the basic setup in episode 1, it's now time to get to know how your camera works. Now don't worry, this will be only on a very simplistic level. In fact, a very good way of thinking about it is to break it down with the word photography. What does it actually mean? Well, it's actually derived from the Greek language. Photo meaning light and graphy meaning drawing or writing. So put them together and you get drawing with light.
We can track the journey of that light as it travels through a camera. This diagram illustrates the very first part of that journey through the lens's first element of glass or front objective. That light then passes through several more elements of glass as it reaches something called the aperture. The aperture is a hole that can be varied in size, very much like our iris and pupil relationship on our own eyes. If we need more light to see, our iris opens up wide. And of course, if it's too bright, our iris gets smaller to limit the light coming in. The aperture in a lens does the same thing. It can be automatically controlled by the camera, or we can manually override it. We'll be talking in detail about the lens aperture in episode 3 of this series. Once that controlled amount of light has travelled through the aperture, it comes next to the camera's shutter. If you have a DSLR camera, a mirror will sit just in front of that shutter. Its purpose is to reflect light up into the daylight viewfinder so you're able to view what the lens is seeing. Now, not all cameras have mirrors. In fact, the term mirrorless cameras is derived from this setup. Instead of light reflecting up into the viewfinder, the light is directly generated into an electronic image, which can be seen in the viewfinder or camera's screen. The light then travels through the shutter. An easy way to think of a shutter is like a very elaborate blind you might find in front of a window. This time, the light is not dependent on how much it is open, but for how long it is open. In other words, time or speed. This is where the term shutter speeds come from. We will look in detail at shutter speeds in episode 4 of this series. Once this newly controlled light makes its way through the shutter, it hits its final destination, the sensor. And before digital cameras, this is where the film would have been. Just like a film was sensitive to light and then went on to record the image, a sensor does the exact same thing. It has millions of light receptors or pixels that turn that light into digital information or drawing your image. Once your sensor has that digital information, it then processes this information with its onboard computer. It then saves it to the memory card. There are different ways to do this, but more of that later. So there we have it. On a very simplistic scale, that's how a camera works. This diagram introduces you to some of the key components in a camera and its lens. Just as important as camera bodies are lenses. In fact, many would argue that the lens is the most important part of any camera system setup. So what do all the numbers mean, and how will it make a difference to your photography? The biggest defining factor of a lens is its focal length. Another way of thinking of it is how much zoom or your angle of view. Focal length is described in millimeters and illustrated on the top of your lens. Here is an example of what your camera lens might look like. 18mm, or 18 as it's described on this lens, is the wide angle, and as we rotate the zoom ring, we move through to a 55mm focal length, or narrowing field of view, and this brings things closer. Varying camera systems have different numbers attributed to them. However, an easy way to remember this, regardless of your camera type, is the lower the number, the wider the angle. The higher the number, the more telephoto or magnified your image becomes. Another thing to point out on all lenses is its minimum focus distance. This is how physically close you can get with a lens, enabling it still to autofocus. You may have already experienced this before when shooting with your camera. It could be that it locks up or doesn't take a picture. This is usually down to the fact the camera hasn't focused, and is sometimes because you're too physically close to a subject. Usually, a minimum focus distance for a lens is written on it, or it would be certainly listed in your lens manual. Another key feature of most lenses is its stabilization, usually activated by a switch on the side of the lens. When switched on, this will help your camera's overall steadiness.
As we discussed in episode 1, memory cards are hugely important. They keep all your images safe and secure. But it's not just the capacity that you need to look at. You can buy gigabytes and terabytes worth of data on memory cards now. It's also the speed you need to consider if you're wanting to use your camera for video especially, and equally if you're going to use the burst or continuous shoot mode. The speed of the card will make a big difference to the performance. Memory card speeds are now shown on every card. For stills, here, and video, here. For video, it's usually best to check your camera's instruction manual for the speed of card it recommends. For stills though, the speed of the card will affect how many shots you can take in burst or continuous shoot mode without it stopping or slowing down. You will see an indicator light that stays on until the camera is ready to perform at full speed again. The faster the card speed, the quicker the light goes out. So of course the speed of a memory card is going to be hugely important for anyone that's going to want to take fast pictures, perhaps sports or wildlife, anything in fast succession when you're using that continuous shoot mode. Now the other setting on your camera that's going to be important for the memory card is the type of file that you record to it. You've probably heard of the two most famous RAW and JPEG files. Now what is the difference? Well, RAW first of all is the raw data from the camera's sensor. There is no processing and no compression involved. It's all the data that gets moved to the card. Now that means the information on the card is rather large, so the actual files that you can store in RAW format are somewhat reduced in comparison to JPEG. And equally, if you go to process those pictures, perhaps commercially, and want to get them printed, not everything recognizes a RAW format, so it's very difficult to get them printed directly from the memory card. Whereas a JPEG is universally known, so you can go in anywhere and actually print from a JPEG. So why would you use a RAW format image? Well, if you're interested in editing your images, raw data absolutely helps you because it's every piece of data that you can adjust or play around with is actually there in the file. Whereas JPEG is slightly compressed. And you can actually vary the compression rates on each camera as well. But when you try to adjust the JPEG, it's not as clean as a RAW image. So to summarize, if you're interested in editing your images and you want to get into things like Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture, whatever your editing package is, you will benefit from RAW images. It means your edits will be more accurate. If you're not interested in editing and you just want to print your images or share or send them, then a JPEG will absolutely be fine for you. Okay, that's it for this week, guys. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Join us next week when we'll be talking about the aperture and the aperture priority mode on your cameras. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, give us a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that all-important bell icon. Thanks for watching.